Delighted now to be joined by Bernie Brookes, who is the owner and executive chairman of Colette. Of course, Bernie was also the CEO of the iconic Australian retailer Myers. Bernie, thank you very much indeed for joining me. It's lovely to hear Australian accents around the place at the moment, something we haven't heard for a while. How did it feel making that journey?
Yeah, no, it was a nearly 30-hour journey from door to door, so it's a long way, and I think, like most people, haven't been on a plane for a couple of years apart from just internal, and surprisingly it reminds you how arduous travel can be and how awkward it can be, but at the end it was good to be here, and it's just good to refresh the mind a little bit.
Bernie, let's first of all start with the student competition. You're the main judge on this year's student competition. What are your reflections, both in terms of the task that they were asked to do and also the quality of the input?
I get quite enthused by the quality of the people that present, and there's no doubt that colleges and universities these days are producing top quality people as they exit with a good business sense. And I think what it required them to do in this instance was come up with a business sense and a good understanding of sustainability and fast fashion. And so what we asked them to do was to come up with a way in which 25% of fast fashion's income and benefit can come with a sustainable bent to it. And so they come up with a number of ideas of second-hand apparel right the way through to incentivisation, to marketing, to a close to order, to the metaverse, and a wide diversity of views. But it did hit home that previously the concept of sustainability and the concept of ensuring that whether every aspect of the world is considered is suddenly now top of mind rather than it being an afterthought. I think if you go back 20, maybe even only 10 years ago, people were thinking of sustainability as an added benefit that you could sell to consumers. Today, it's a license to get into the game, and that was very obvious by their presentations.
Now, any great ideas that if you were still the CEO of Myers, you would have said, actually, great, we'll use that?
Yeah, I think the second-hand apparel concept is growing. I mean, Poshmark, there's a number of businesses around the world really making it quite successful. And so I think that concept of second-hand apparel where people are prepared now, and whether it's an eBay around the world or whether it's a trading house, and there's a lot of them undertaking it, I think linking it back to the business that your main business is also an important opportunity. And I think the other learning was the role that the metaverse is going to play in the future, and there's no doubt that at the moment it's only at its infancy stage, but we were looking at 5 years advance today, and I think in 5 years advance it's going to look very different to what it's looks at now.
Well, you've had and still do have a very distinguished career in retailing. You've seen many things sort of come and you've seen many things go. Let's start with the metaverse. Do you see that as a flash in the pan, or do you actually see from a retail perspective that maybe ways some retailers looked at the internet as, here today, gone tomorrow? That's clearly not the case. Yeah. Do you see the metaverse in that way, or is it different?
I think to monetize it and to make it something that's applicable to all, let's call it generations and lifestyles, is going to be a lot harder than online. You can have an 80-year-old grandmother, they're actively buying apparel on clothes. Whether they'd be prepared to have an avatar in the universe, the metaverse, is going to be quite challenging. So potentially, and maybe in 10 years I'll regret what I'm about to say, I don't think it's ever going to have the capture, depth and breadth of the World Wide Web. However, in saying that, you think of the rise of gaming, and you think of the rise of people in that sort of avatar universe, and you think of cryptocurrency, and you think of all the things today that are making the world quite different and potentially be different. And so there's no doubt it's going to have play. And I think if you're a large retailer today and you haven't at least got some thought to how the metaverse is going to impact it, what role it can play, and perhaps some early seed funding in developing your strategy, then I think you may miss the boat. But early adopters normally are the expensive adopters, but they're also one that can benefit immensely from it.
Now, many of us who've been seasoned travellers to Australia over the years to watch Australian retail are at a great disadvantage at the moment because, like myself, haven't been to Australia for a good 2.5 years. Can you paint us a little picture of what's going on in retail in Australia?
So there's probably four main drivers at the moment. The first is increasing inflation issues. The cost of containers, the cost of product out of China, general inflation in commodity prices, cost of labour starting to rise. So we're seeing if you like, the renewal of that inflation, that ugly inflation component. And although the Reserve Bank says it's 3.2, I think most retailers know that the cost pressures are starting to get enormous. So we're getting enormous cost pressures added to enormous issues in regard to inflation, and our price of petrol is at a record high, and the cost of living pressures are starting to fade. So we're getting pressure on wages. That's the first sort of thing that's happening. The second is availability of labour. We've got very low unemployment rate at about 4%, and that unemployment rate means we're unable to secure retail staff. So in one of the businesses I own, we have 58 stores. I think we've got 17 store manager vacancies. So very, very difficult to get retail staff.
Where have all the people gone to? Because we have the same right across the world at the moment.
Well, I think a lot of them are coming out of, if I take Australia, particularly out of Australia, they're coming out of Africa, they're coming out of India, they're coming out of Singapore, Malaysia, most of that Southeast Asia environment. And they make up the bulk of they come in under a visa, a working visa, and they fill a lot of the gaps that are there at the moment in Australia. So I also fortunately own a pub, and
I wouldn't say unfortunately.
And I don't have any Australians working in that pub because they're all on what's called 457 visas, and we're struggling to get people in hospitality as well. So it's an enormous problem at the moment with the labour force in retail. The third aspect I think we're seeing is that the one thing that changed during COVID was large retailers that were seen as ugly large retailers and those that were aggressive and stealing market share have suddenly become liked. And Bunnings, Coles, Woolworths, a lot of the major department stores.
And the reason for that?
Because they did so well during COVID. They supported the communities, they supported the environment, they were responsible citizens. And so we're not seeing this beat up that was occurring of the retailers not being recognised and not being accomplished for what they've actually achieved and the employment they've created. But they were fantastic during the COVID environment. And the last area, I think, is profitability has been particularly good. I think during COVID there was government subsidies which helped, and there were rental subsidies which helped. But even at the end of that, nobody's taken a dump from a point of view of profitability, and they've all been able to achieve increased levels of profitability over the last 12 months, which has put them in a particularly strong time. So as we start, with increased commodity prices in Australia, which is so important, wheat, iron ore, no matter what it is, that drives the economy. You add to that then, once we get employment back with visas now being opened up and travel being opened up, the next couple of years for Australia potentially is a great time in the sun. It really would be a fortunate period for retail over the next couple of years, as you've got, even some inflation, as we know, can be good. It's just getting the wages under control and getting labour availability. And if it is, I think we're going to see a really stellar couple of years in Australian retail.
Well, I hope that's so as well. Many people are talking about this concept of the next sort of generation of retail is going to be the really iconic ones. From your perspective of building a retailer, building the retailer's brand, what is an iconic retail brand?
I disagree with that almost totally. I think it's the reverse. I think the iconic brands that are around in Australia, Coles, Woolworths, Bunnings, David Jones, Myer, Kmart, Target, are going to continue to be those strong brands well respected. If you look at the top 20 brands in Australia, the majority of them fit under those characteristics. Your Commonwealth Bank, your Telstra, they're the iconic companies. And I think it's very hard to get a new company into that space because of the enormous diversity of brands, the fragmentation of brands that's occurring. And so for someone to sort of get into that top 10, unless they're an Amazon, it's going to be very, very difficult. So, I think as much as the World Wide Web has had an impact, in most categories it's 10 to 20% of overall turnover. In some categories like electronic it might get to 30 in Australia, but in most cases it's still in single digit or between 10 and 20. So it's not having that enormous impact, and we're seeing...
will that grow much further or not, or is there a innate cap in Australia given the geography?
It certainly is, and that's an astute comment. I think the geography plays a big role. You've got Catch, who is probably one of the largest online retailers bought by Wesfarmers, that have just announced a $44 million loss. You've got Kogan having trouble with stocks and profitability and future potential. So those pure play operators we're seeing really start to waver. And what we're now seeing is the growth of David Jones online, of businesses like Myer online, of businesses like Woolworths online. I think Woolworths online did $4 billion this year, which is about 10% of their total turnover. Now, they're remarkable increases, and what's happening is they're outdoing the original players of pure play, and they're learning to be better and integrate their models very, very well.
So the whole concept, I suppose, of being able to mix your physical estate with the virtual estate in Australia is the winning model?
You bet. And I think that's obvious now when you look at the financial results of each of the companies in each of the spaces. And the winners are, the growth of 80 to 90% in businesses like David Jones and Myer in online, bricks and mortar down 2, 3, maybe up 1 or 2, but generally it's the growth of online by being able to integrate it into their model. They've got trusted brands, and all along, I think most people knew that the trusted brands were going to be the trusted brands online once they got their act together, and they've spent a lot of money, but it's paid off for them now as we're seeing improvements in market share.
So taking a sort of a top view look, what should key Australian retailers now be doing in order to become powerhouses
Sure.
in the next period of growth?
Sure. I think firstly you've got to diversify your supply chain. China has told us that the geopolitical issues at the moment mean that you need to have an alternate supply chain. So retailers are running around trying to find other forms of supply, whether it be India, Africa, other parts of Asia. I think the second thing is there's a war on talent. Largely because of the non-availability of people. And so we're seeing a very, very much needed investment in people, in training, much needed investment in retention of staff. And so that's becoming now as big a common denominator as the price that you sell things at. And I think the third thing is that continue to invest in online while still investing in stores. The one thing that has occurred during COVID, there's been very little investment, capital investment in bricks and mortar stores. And I think there's now a need for reinvigorating some of those stores models because people are getting off their couches, off the internet, out into stores again, they're out shopping again, they're out entertaining again, and I think they want to see new models. So I think reinvesting money back into the stores as well as reinvesting some funds obviously into online is the way forward.
So finally, Bernie, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Retail going in the future, not just in Australia but across the world.
Yeah, I think we'll probably get 2 to 3 years of really good growth. I mean, I know we've got the after effects of COVID. I know we've got issues with the Ukraine, and I know there's potential issues again with China. Those 3 things are probably going to continue to put a bit of a handbrake on the growth opportunities. But providing they don't potentially break out, I think we're going to see a pretty stellar time overall in global retailing over the next few years.
Well, on that very optimistic note, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Much obliged. Thank you.